But this is the other big headline tonight from the taxation space. The government has formed a task force to draft a new direct tax legislation. Member of the CBDT, Arbind Modi, will be the convener of the task force, and Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramnian will be a permanent invitee. The panel has been given 6 months to submit its report to the government. While drafting the new law, the panel will look at a direct tax system that's prevalent in other countries. It will also look at international best practices and also the economic needs of the country. Joining us now for a reaction, Dinesh, Kanabar, CEO of Dhruva Advisors. Mr. Kanabar, appreciate you joining us. The DTC is back, and more importantly, Arbind Modi is back, Mr. Kanabar. 2009, he was really leading the direct tax code drafting. He was the author of the new direct tax code. Didn't go very far. This was one of Mr. Chidambaram's big grouses. But what do you make of the fact that the government has now decided to set up a committee to look at the direct tax code afresh?
Two quick comments. First is going to the point which you made regarding the earlier DTC, which went through a number of reiterations that sought to change the entire direct tax law in some material measure. So, for example, there was a tax proposed on the assets held by an entity. The way MAT would be played out was very, very different. The levy of wealth tax, etc., it was very, very different. Since then, a lot of water has gone under the bridge. So, for example, while that bill proposed that wealth tax be levied on every single asset, including shares, the wealth tax itself has now been abolished. So if you look at the situation that prevails today and the situation which was prevailing then are very, very different, number one. Number two, a number of reiterations happened on the DTC, and finally the idea was dropped. I remember when the new government came in, this question had again come up to say whether there is a need for a new law. And after a lot of thought process, the finance minister came back to say, we do not need it. The way I would look at it probably is that what do we need in direct taxes is really more of better administration, a means whereby disputes can be resolved without having to go through a 20-year cycle. It is not that our law is very, very difficult. It is really the way it is administered and the way litigation comes up, which is very, very critical. It will be interesting to see that the committee which has been formed up, so to say, is more or less the committee which the government had set up under the leadership of Mr. Ishwar. And which made recommendations for the budget last time. Some of those recommendations got accepted, some of those were not implemented. So it'll be interesting to see how the committee comes up and what does it want to do. But I do feel that the moment you set up a new law, unless you are writing it very, very radically different, the issues are going to be the same. The point is, how do you administer the law in a much, much better manner? That is more important.
Yes, administering the law is important, but in terms of specific recommendations, and if I look at the terms of reference, the terms very clearly say that the committee must look at tax systems that are prevalent outside of India. It must adhere to international best practices. In the context of what we're seeing happen, for instance, with this big tax overhaul in the US, with further rationalization as far as rates, etc. are concerned, the context today is very different from when Arbind Modi and his team were looking at this issue a few years ago. So what is going to be the need of the hour when it comes to not just enforcement and better implementation, but in terms of radical change as well?
So it's an interesting question that you pose. When you speak about USA and the changes in USA, Shereen, USA is probably the only country, the only real country, which is not part of OECD BEPS report. The BEPS recommendations which OECD came out with really reinforce India's position on a number of things. And the Indian law has been amended consistently to incorporate all the BEPS provisions, whether it's in terms of the country-by-country reporting, whether it's in terms of taxes on electronic transactions. So we have done whatever we needed to do immediately. USA is a far cry from that. They have not really followed and not subscribed to those. They believe actually that OECD recommendations seek to tax e-commerce income arising to U.S. companies and therefore view it as an encroachment into the finances of U.S. company. So there's a bit of a confrontation right out there. So I think more of the learnings really will come from, for example, how UK, for example, has put diverted profit tax and issues arising from that, some of the things which have happened in Australia. And again, all of these will have to be blended with the fact that we want to do ease of doing business, and really how do we make the tax laws consistent with our goal of ease of doing business.
All right. There hasn't been any decision yet on when the committee is going to hold its first meeting, but we do know that the committee has been asked to submit its report within the next 6 months. The last time, I do remember that there was stiff resistance from corporate India to some of the recommendations, specifically around the issues of MAT, etc., as Mr. Kanabar was pointing out. But let's see what happens this time around. Mr. Kanabar, always a pleasure, sir. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18.